From Abe Lincoln the wrestler to the shortest armed conflict in history, here are 13 bizarre historical facts you won't believe. Extreme minimum age. Ancient Aztecs favored an alcoholic drink made from fermented sap called pulque, but you'd have to wait a while before indulging. The legal minimum drinking age was 52. That was more than twice their life expectancy. Even though they had strict laws against public drunkenness, the Aztecs held a New Year's festival every 4 years that required all citizens to drink alcohol. That even included toddlers. Made of glass. From 1380 until his death in 1422, Charles VI ruled as the King of France. At the time of his coronation, he was only 11 years old, so he ruled with a regency, or set of counselors. That arrangement seemed to work well, until Charles terminated the regency when he was 21. But in his early to mid-20s, he started to experience psychotic episodes. That led to the nickname Charles the Mad. In various instances, he couldn't remember his own name or recognize his wife and children. He ran so wildly through the corridors of his Paris home that the entrances were walled up to keep the king inside. But his most well-known illness caused him to believe that he was made of glass. The belief was so deep that Charles devised ways to keep himself from shattering. One of his solutions was to have iron rods sewn into his clothing so that he wouldn't break if he physically contacted another person. Charles's psychiatric disorder came to be known as the glass delusion. Researchers say it mainly affected people of the wealthier and educated classes between the 5th and 17th centuries. Just the facts. The fax machine is a quaint notion now, but at one time it was a leading-edge form of wireless communication, and the technology could have been in widespread use since the 19th century. Alexander Bain, the inventor of the fax machine, invented an apparatus that could scan messages line by line in addition to low-quality images. Bain received a patent for his electric printing telegraph in 1843. Subsequent refinements from other inventors yielded the telefax machine. The first commercial service started in France in 1865, about 11 years before the telephone was invented. Funeral for a leg. Lopez de Santa Anna was a military general and politician who first defended New Spain, then fought for Mexican independence. He was a big influence on early Mexican politics and served 12 non-consecutive presidential terms over 22 years. While Santa Anna dominates Mexican history, he's also a familiar name in U.S. history as the general in charge of the Battle of the Alamo. While he won that battle, he was later captured by Texas forces, which sent his career into decline. He attempted to redeem himself in 1837, when he led Mexican troops against the French at Veracruz. While attempting to retreat, Santa Anna was hit in the leg by cannon fire. Primitive medical conditions forced doctors to amputate the limb. After the battle, he ordered that his lost leg be buried with full military honors. He later used prosthetic legs, both of which were captured by U.S. troops during the Mexican-American War. Soldiers allegedly used one of them as a baseball bat. Piggy banks. Containers used for saving money have been around for thousands of years. Many of us had a piggy bank growing up, but they weren't always known as such, and they weren't necessarily named for the porkers. Since the idea is to break open the bank when it's full, cheap material was often used for making the containers. During the Middle Ages, they used a cost-effective yellow clay called pig, spelled P-Y-G-G. People understandably began calling the clay containers pig jars. By the 18th century, that had changed to pig banks. At some point, the similarity of the names was acknowledged, and the containers morphed into the porcine shape that we know today. Humanzees. The term refers to a creature that represents the hybrid offspring of a human and a chimpanzee. Over the years, there have been substantiated reports of scientists attempting to create such hybrids. One of the best-known accounts dates to the 1920s in the Soviet Union. Dr. Ilya Ivanovich Ivanov made the first known attempt, which was ultimately unsuccessful. More recently, in 2019, there were unconfirmed reports that scientists in China produced the world's first human-monkey chimeras. The embryos of those animals allegedly contained human cells, but were terminated before their organs or nervous systems could develop. The Great Molasses Flood. Molasses is a thick, sticky substance that's created when sugarcane or sugar beets are refined into sugar. You can't imagine a product like this actually flooding into city streets, but that's exactly what happened in 1919. A huge storage tank of the stuff exploded in Boston and released some 2.3 million gallons, or 8.7 million liters, of crude molasses. A resultant wave of the gooey product oozed into the streets at an estimated speed of 35 miles an hour, or 56 kilometers an hour. That's pretty fast considering the old joke about someone being as slow as molasses, but there was nothing funny about the consequences. A wall of molasses nearly 25 feet high, or 8 meters, destroyed buildings and vehicles, and drowned people and animals. More than 20 fatalities were reported, and at least 150 people were injured. The bizarre and deadly event became a part of local folklore. For decades afterwards, residents claimed the area smelled like molasses on hot summer days. Catacombs of Paris. You wouldn't guess it from the glamour of Paris, but the City of Light has a dark side. Underneath the city streets is a network of old quarry tunnels, which serve as the final destination for around 6 million Parisians. Most of the dead are unidentified. From the 18th to the 19th centuries, random skeletons were taken from the overcrowded graveyards of Paris and transported here. The bones actually are set up in an orderly fashion. Authorities arranged the remains in their modern manner when the location's capacity as a tourist attraction was realized. Today, the catacombs have attracted groups of tourists and urban explorers known as cataphiles. The shortest war. We've seen how wars can be fought for years or even centuries, but this one has the distinction of being the shortest war documented in world history. The Anglo-Zanzibar War lasted 38 minutes and 45 seconds. The conflict stemmed from the Heligoland-Zanzibar Treaty, signed by Germany and Britain in 1890. That accord ceded control of Germany's interests in Zanzibar to the UK. They installed their own sultan, who died 3 years later under mysterious circumstances. The sultan's nephew immediately moved into the palace without British approval. That violated the treaty, and the nephew was told to vacate the premises. Instead, he mustered troops and had himself proclaimed the new sultan. After unsuccessful negotiations, British ships bombarded the palace. Within 2 minutes, the pretender fled through a back entrance and escaped. About 36 minutes later, the shelling was halted, and the war was over. The Great Khan's great progeny. When he died in 1227 CE, Genghis Khan was emperor of the Mongol Empire, the largest contiguous empire in history. After taking power by uniting the nomadic tribes of Northeast Asia, he invaded and conquered most of Eurasia. His campaigns were infamous for their brutality, and that tradition was carried on by his descendants. As it turns out, he had a lot of descendants. Scientists have found that approximately 8% of the men living in the region of the former empire carry DNA that is directly traceable to the Mongol warrior. That works out to around 16 million modern-day descendants, or about 0.5% of the world's male population. It seems the Great Khan not only ruled the world's largest empire, but he helped populate it as well. A historical horned hoax. Did you know that Viking helmets didn't have horns? It's a popular misconception, but here's a connection between those warriors and horned objects that really did exist. It involves medium-sized cetaceans called narwhal whales. They're famous for their long tusks, which resemble the horn of unicorns. As in the 21st century, people during the Middle Ages were fascinated with mythical creatures, and like today, there were entrepreneurs who managed to profit from that fascination. In addition to pillaging and plundering, Vikings had a head for business. When Eric the Red and his followers settled Greenland in the 10th century and encountered narwhals, they recognized a golden opportunity. They knew unicorn horns were highly sought after for their magical properties, so they took the narwhal tusks and sold them as such. Merchants and royalty throughout Europe paid exorbitant prices, and the Vikings reaped huge profits. They had a lock on the horn trade for hundreds of years, but after Europeans discovered narwhals in the 17th century, the hoax was exposed. The Bloody Countess. There's speculation that Jack the Ripper may have been a rogue member of England's royal family. Well, long ago in Hungary, a member of that country's royal family actually was revealed to be a notorious serial killer. Active during the 16th and 17th centuries, Elizabeth Bathory was a noblewoman who was later nicknamed the Bloody Countess, and for good reason. Along with 4 accomplices, she was accused in the deaths of hundreds of women between the years of 1590 and 1610. The precise number of victims is unknown, but the highest estimate mentioned during her trial was 650. Testimonies from hundreds of witnesses and survivors, along with implicating physical evidence, proved her guilt. Thanks to her wealth and noble family, the Countess was spared being executed. Instead, she was locked in a windowless room inside a castle where she died in 1614. And in this corner, Abraham Lincoln. The 16th President of the United States is a near mythic political figure and has become something of a cultural touchstone. He's appeared in countless fictional stories, including one where Abe was portrayed as a vampire slayer. So why not a wrestler? That one isn't fiction. Mr. Lincoln was a wrestler in his younger days. Standing about 6'4" or 193 centimeters, he was a strong, athletic chap who took on and defeated a local champion while living in Illinois. It's claimed that the future president had some 300 matches and only lost once. To be fair, those details are hazy, and wrestling of the 1800s didn't resemble anything like the professional wrestling of today. But it is documented that Abe was skilled in the sport, and he engaged in wrestling matches fairly often. He's even enshrined in the National Wrestling Hall of Fame in Oklahoma. What would have been a good wrestling nickname for Abe? Tell us in the comments. Thanks for watching this episode. Did you like the video? Tell us what you think in the comments below, and be sure to like, follow, and subscribe.